Most gardens trap you in an endless cycle. Plant, water, harvest, rip everything out, start again, year after year. But what if you could plant your food once and keep harvesting for the next 30, 50, even 100 years? Not hypothetical, not experimental, not permaculture fantasy. Real crops, proven producers, plants your great-grandparents trusted when food security actually mattered. While modern gardening glorifies annual effort, the most intelligent growers throughout history understood something simple. Permanent systems beat temporary ones. One planting, decades of food. Today, we're looking at 20 extremely productive crops that grow like fruit trees. Plants that turn backyards into long-term food engines instead of seasonal chores. Some produce hundreds of pounds. Some thrive in terrible soil. Some practically ignore pests. And one grows so aggressively, you may actually regret planting it. Let's start with a crop almost nobody talks about. Despite the fact it can turn an ordinary fence into a vertical fruit factory. Hardy kiwi. Hardy kiwi isn't a novelty fruit. It's a productivity monster hiding in plain sight. Unlike the fuzzy kiwis stacked in grocery stores, hardy kiwi produces smooth, grape-sized fruits you can eat whole. No peeling, no slicing. Just harvest and eat. But the real shock is the yield. A single mature vine can produce 50 to 100 pounds of fruit every year from one plant. These vines laugh at cold temperatures, surviving winters down to roughly minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 31 degrees Celsius, making them viable in climates that destroy most fruit crops. And once established, they require surprisingly little attention. Plant them near a strong trellis, arbor, or fence, because these vines are vigorous. 15 to 20 feet of growth is normal, not exceptional. Give them structure, and they'll repay you with decades of harvests. You will need both male and female plants for pollination, but one male can support up to 8 females. A small upfront decision that pays off massively long-term. Full production typically begins within 3 to 5 years. After that, the plant shifts from garden project to something closer to infrastructure. The reason hardy kiwi never became a commercial staple is simple. The fruits are delicate. They don't ship well, which is exactly why they're perfect for backyard growers. Sometimes the best crops are the ones industrial agriculture ignored. Now let's talk about a tree that thrives where most fruit trees die. Mayhaw. Most fruit trees demand good drainage. Mayhaw prefers the opposite. Naturally found along streams and floodplains, Mayhaw tolerates wet soil that would suffocate apple or peach roots. If you have a low-lying section of yard that stays damp, this tree doesn't see a problem, it sees opportunity. Each mature Mayhaw can produce 20 to 30 gallons of fruit in a single season. Not pounds, gallons. The small red fruits resemble crab apples and carry a bright tartness that transforms into exceptional jelly, syrup, and wine. In the American South, Mayhaw jelly isn't just food, it's tradition. What makes the tree especially compelling is its longevity. Plant one today, and it may still be producing for your grandchildren. Disease pressure is low, maintenance is minimal, and harvest can be shockingly efficient. Historically, growers simply spread sheets beneath the branches and gave the tree a shake. Minutes later, gallons of fruit were ready for processing. Commercial agriculture overlooked Mayhaw for one predictable reason. It doesn't transport well. But again, what fails commercially often excels locally. Next is a plant that refuses to be categorized as fragile. Serviceberry. If reliability were a fruit tree, it would look like serviceberry. Cold hardy down to zone 2. This plant survives winters that would devastate most orchards. Yet when early summer arrives, it produces clusters of sweet berries with subtle almond notes, somewhere between blueberries and cherries, in flavor. A mature plant can yield 10 to 20 pounds annually, and unlike many fruits, it bears consistently. No drama years, no mysterious production gaps, just food. Historically, indigenous peoples harvested service berries extensively, drying them for winter and incorporating them into pemmican, one of the most calorie-dense survival foods ever created. Adaptability is another strength. Serviceberry tolerates varied soils, handles partial shade, and resists deer better than most fruiting plants. Minimal pruning, minimal intervention, maximum reliability. But perhaps its greatest advantage is dual purpose. In spring, clouds of white flowers make it ornamental enough for front yards. In fall, the foliage turns brilliant shades of orange and red. Food producers rarely double as landscape upgrades. Serviceberry does both effortlessly. Birds love the berries, which means you may want netting if you expect a full harvest. A small trade-off for a plant this dependable. Now let's move to a tree that has quietly fed people for thousands of years, yet remains strangely absent from modern gardens. Cornelian cherry dogwood. Before supermarkets, before refrigeration, before global supply chains, there was Cornelian cherry. Cultivated across Europe and Asia for millennia, this tree built its reputation on one trait: durability. It blooms absurdly early, sometimes while snow still sits on the ground, covering itself in bright yellow flowers when most plants haven't even woken up. By late summer, branches hang heavy with glossy red fruits, too tart to enjoy raw for most people. But cook them with sugar. They transform into extraordinary preserves, syrups, and fruit leathers. The tree itself borders on indestructible, hardy to zone 4, drought-tolerant once established, remarkably resistant to pests and disease, and capable of living well over a century. This isn't a short-term investment. It's legacy planting. Modern gardeners forgot Cornelian cherry largely because cultural knowledge faded. People stopped learning how to use it. But productivity never disappeared. Sometimes the best crops aren't new discoveries, they're forgotten ones. And speaking of resilience, the next tree might be the ultimate plant for people who don't want to babysit their garden. Jujube. If neglect killed most fruit trees, Jujube would be immortal. Heat? Bring it on. Drought? Not a concern. Poor soil? Almost preferred. Originally cultivated in China over 4,000 years ago, Jujube earned its place through relentless productivity and nutritional density. The fruits can be eaten fresh, crisp, lightly sweet, almost apple-like, or dried into chewy pieces resembling dates. Either way, mature trees regularly produce 40 to 100 pounds per year. And unlike early bloomers vulnerable to surprise frost, Jujube leafs out late, quietly avoiding one of the biggest risks in fruit production. Maintenance is refreshingly minimal. Little spraying, little pruning, few pest issues, just sunlight and patience. Some varieties carry thorns, but improved cultivars like Li and Lang make harvesting far easier. Better yet, while the tree is self-pollinating, yields climb even higher when paired with another variety. Western agriculture largely ignored Jujube because it doesn't behave like a supermarket fruit. But for backyard growers, especially in hot climates, it borders on transformational. Plant it, give it space, then mostly get out of the way. The next plant is a perfect example. It looks unusual, it requires a little trust, and historically, it was considered a luxury fruit. Medlar. At first glance, Medlar doesn't inspire confidence. The fruit is small, brown, and almost looks unfinished, crowned with a wide-open calyx that gives it an oddly ancient appearance. But Medlar hides one of the strangest transformations in the plant world. Because you don't eat it when it's fresh, you wait. After harvest in late fall, the fruit undergoes a process called bletting, controlled softening that turns the firm interior into something resembling spiced apple butter. Sweet, aromatic, complex. For centuries across medieval Europe, Medlar was considered a winter delicacy precisely because it became edible when little else was available. The tree itself is impressively rugged, cold hardy to roughly zone 5, tolerant of varied soils, largely ignored by pests, and capable of producing reliably for decades with minimal pruning. It stays compact too, usually under 15 feet, making it ideal for smaller spaces. Modern gardeners abandoned Medlar mostly because it requires patience. But if you understand long-term food systems, patience stops looking like a burden and starts looking like leverage. Now let's move to a tree that does the exact opposite, overwhelming you with productivity. Quince. Some trees produce generously. Quince produces excessively. In strong years, a single mature tree can yield 200 to 300 pounds of fruit. Yes, from one tree. Raw quince is almost inedible, rock hard, intensely astringent. But apply heat and something remarkable happens. The pale flesh deepens into a glowing pink-orange, releasing an aroma so floral it can fill an entire kitchen. Flavor lands somewhere between apple, pear, and rose. High natural pectin means jams and jellies set effortlessly, which is why quince became a cornerstone of traditional preserving cultures. Membrillo, the famous Spanish quince paste, exists for a reason. Beyond productivity, quince checks nearly every resilience box: cold hardy, disease resistant. Disease, comfortable in heavy clay soils that suffocate other fruit trees, and capable of producing for half a century or more. Commercial markets ignored quince because it isn't snackable. But if your mindset shifts from convenience to abundance, few trees compete. Now, let's talk about a berry shrub that nutrition researchers can't stop studying. Aronia, chokeberry. Aronia doesn't try to win you over with sweetness. Fresh berries are sharply tart, intense enough to make the name chokeberry feel justified. But nutritionally, they're in another league. Research consistently shows antioxidant levels that surpass blueberries, cranberries, and even acai, which explains why large-scale Aronia farming has quietly expanded across parts of Europe. A mature shrub produces 20 to 30 pounds annually, often with almost no intervention. Poor soil? Fine. Wet conditions? Also fine. Extreme cold? Not a problem. Aronia thrives down to zone 3. Serious pests and diseases are rare, making this one of the closest things to a plant-it-and-forget-it berry crop. The fruit shines once processed: juices, syrups, dried blends, smoothies. And because the berries freeze exceptionally well, storage becomes effortless. Aronia rarely appears in backyard conversations simply because fresh eating isn't pleasant. But when your priority shifts toward nutrition and reliability, it starts looking less like a compromise and more like a strategic crop. Speaking of strategy, the next plant improves your soil while feeding you. Sea buckthorn. Imagine harvesting heavy clusters of bright orange berries from a plant growing happily in terrible soil. That's sea buckthorn. Native across harsh coastal and mountainous regions, this thorny shrub develops survival traits most crops can only dream of: wind, salt spray, drought, freezing winters. Sea buckthorn adapts. Better yet, it fixes nitrogen in the soil, actively improving fertility for nearby plants. Few fruiting crops double as soil builders. Production can reach up to 50 pounds per mature plant, but harvesting requires respect. The thorns are serious. Many growers freeze fruit-laden branches so berries detach easily, a small operational trick that makes a big difference. Flavor is intensely sour, but nutritionally dense beyond reason, packed with vitamin C, omega fatty acids, and antioxidants, which is exactly why sea buckthorn became a commercial health crop in parts of Russia and China. You will need male and female plants for pollination, but once established, expect decades of output from a shrub that asks very little. Now let's pivot to a plant that almost sounds fictional when you list its traits. Goumi, sweet fruit. Nitrogen fixation, drought tolerance, minimal pest pressure, heavy yields. Goumi checks boxes so efficiently it almost feels engineered, yet it's been quietly growing in gardens for generations. By early summer, branches glow with small translucent red berries carrying a bright, sweet tart flavour, something between cherry and rhubarb. And unlike Aronia, Goumi is genuinely enjoyable fresh. A mature shrub typically produces 8 to 15 pounds annually, while improving the soil around it through root nodules, self-fertile, adaptable to partial shade, comfortable in poor soils, and compact enough, usually under 8 feet, to function beautifully in edible hedgerows. Birds adore the fruit, so timing your harvest matters. But the real mystery is why Goumi never went mainstream. Most likely, lack of commercial shipping potential. By now, you may be noticing a pattern. The best backyard crops often fail as supermarket crops. Which brings us to a berry built for brutal climates. Honeyberry, Haskap. Honeyberry rewrites the fruit calendar, while strawberries are still waking up ill. Honeyberries are already ripening, sometimes in late spring, occasionally even earlier. These elongated blue berries taste like a fusion of blueberry and raspberry, with a complexity that surprises first-time growers. But climate resilience is where they dominate. Cold hardy to roughly minus 40 degrees, honeyberry isn't just tolerant of harsh winters, it requires them. Established plants yield 5 to 10 pounds each, increasing steadily with age. They tolerate varied soils, need minimal pruning, and suffer from very few pest issues. Just remember, plant at least 2 varieties for cross-pollination. The shrubs stay manageable, typically under 6 feet, making them ideal for smaller properties. Honeyberry is gaining attention, but it still hasn't saturated gardens, which means early adopters benefit most. And now, we're about to step into a plant that blurs the line between food and medicine. If you study traditional food systems long enough, one pattern becomes obvious. The plants that survive generations aren't delicate. They're aggressive, resilient, almost inconveniently productive. The next crop is exactly that. A plant so vigorous that once it settles in, you'll wonder why you ever worried about food security in the first place. Elderberry. Elderberry doesn't grow slowly. It surges. Within just 2 to 3 years, this shrub can shift from a small planting into a serious producer, forming large clusters of deep purple berries that have supported traditional medicine cabinets for centuries. A mature elderberry bush commonly yields 12 to 15 pounds of fruit every year, and planting multiple shrubs quickly turns harvest into an event rather than a task. But elderberry offers something many crops don't: 2 harvests. In early summer, wide clusters of creamy white flowers emerge, fragrant, edible, and prized for cordials and syrups. Later comes the berry crop, food and flavour from the same plant. Adaptability is another reason elderberry earned its reputation. Wet soils, dry soils, partial shade. It tolerates conditions that frustrate more sensitive fruits. Cold hardy to zone 3. Fast regrowth after pruning. An extremely long productive life once established. One important note: berries must be cooked before consumption. Raw elderberries can cause digestive discomfort, but once transformed into syrup, jam, or wine, they become both safe and exceptional. Commercial agriculture largely ignored elderberry because the fruit is delicate. For backyard growers, that's irrelevant. Production is what matters, and few shrubs produce this confidently. Now let's move to a tree where production stops being impressive and starts becoming absurd. Mulberry. Mulberry is what happens when nature removes the brakes. Under good conditions, a mature mulberry tree can produce 100 to 300 pounds of fruit in a single year. Read that again. One tree, hundreds of pounds. The berries resemble elongated blackberries, ripening gradually over several weeks, which spreads the harvest rather than overwhelming you all at once. Flavour is sweet, mild, and widely appealing. Fresh eating is easy, but mulberry also adapts beautifully to drying, baking, jams, and even livestock feed. Chickens, in particular, benefit from fallen fruit, a small ecosystem forming beneath the canopy. The tree itself grows rapidly when young, sometimes several feet per season, and adapts to a wide range of soils. Drought tolerance improves with maturity. Pest pressure stays relatively low. Birds will absolutely notice your tree. Some growers even plant mulberries intentionally to distract birds from more delicate crops. There is one consideration. Placement matters. Ripened berries drop freely and can stain surfaces below. But that's less a flaw, and more a reminder of how productive the tree truly is. Mulberry faded from suburban landscapes mostly because people prioritize tidy yards over food production. If your priority is calories per square foot, mulberry deserves serious attention. Now let's talk about a tree that feels almost tropical, despite thriving in temperate climates. Pawpaw. The first time someone tastes a ripe pawpaw, the reaction is usually disbelief, because it doesn't taste like a fruit that should grow in cooler regions. Imagine banana meets mango, with a custard-like texture, rich, creamy, almost dessert-like straight from the tree. Yet pawpaw is native to North America and perfectly adapted to zones 5 through 9. A mature tree can produce 50 to 100 pounds annually, and once established, it may continue producing for a century. Yes, 100 years of harvest from a single planting. Even more impressive? Pawpaw faces very few serious pest problems. Its leaves contain natural compounds that deter many insects. It also tolerates partial shade, making it ideal for forest gardens or layered planting systems. You will need at least 2 varieties for pollination, but the payoff is enormous. The biggest reason pawpaw never became a supermarket fruit is shelf life. Once ripe, the fruit lasts only days, which makes it commercially inconvenient and personally valuable. Sometimes the best foods are the ones you can't buy. Next is a tree that teaches patience and rewards it heavily. American persimmon. Eat an unripe American persimmon and you won't forget it. Extreme astringency locks your mouth instantly, a natural defense mechanism against premature harvesting. But wait until after frost, and the fruit transforms. Soft, deeply sweet, almost caramel-like, often compared to dates. A mature tree regularly produces 75 to 150 pounds of fruit, and once its deep taproot establishes, the tree becomes extraordinarily resilient. Drought tolerance improves dramatically. Poor soils become acceptable. Cold down to zone 5 poses little threat. These trees don't just live long, they anchor themselves into the landscape. Generations have harvested from the same persimmons. While wild trees are often dioecious, requiring male and female plants, improved self-fertile cultivars simplify the process. Left unpruned, trees can grow quite tall, but thoughtful pruning keeps harvest within reach. Historically, persimmons were staples for both indigenous communities and early settlers. Another reminder that food security once depended on permanence. And permanence is exactly what the next tree delivers, with a timing advantage most fruits can't match. Loquat. When almost no fresh fruit exists, Loquat ripens. Early spring harvest is its superpower. Clusters of orange-yellow fruit arriving when most trees are just beginning to leaf out. Flavor lands somewhere between apricot and mango, bright and refreshing after winter's monotony. A mature loquat commonly produces 50 to 100 pounds per season, all while maintaining a beautiful evergreen canopy that provides year-round structure. Large tropical-looking leaves give it ornamental presence. Fragrant flowers appear during cooler months. And once established, the tree handles drought surprisingly well. Pest issues are typically minor. Growth stays manageable, usually under 25 feet, making it suitable for residential spaces. The primary limitation is climate. Loquat prefers warmer zones, generally thriving in zones 8 through 10. But where conditions allow, it becomes one of the most satisfying early producers you can plant, and we're not done yet. Because the next crop might be one of the most underrated multi-purpose plants in modern gardens. By now, you've probably noticed something surprising. The most productive food plants aren't fragile, they aren't needy, and they definitely aren't trendy. They're durable, long-lived, and often overlooked simply because they don't fit neatly into modern grocery systems. The next plant is a perfect example, one that quietly combines food production, landscaping value, and resilience into a single package. Feijoa, pineapple guava. Some plants force you to choose between beauty and productivity. Feijoa refuses that trade-off. Also known as pineapple guava, this evergreen shrub produces egg-sized green fruits with a flavor often described as a fusion of pineapple, guava, and mint. Bright, aromatic, unexpected. But what makes feijoa exceptional isn't just the fruit, it's how many roles the plant can play at once. Need a privacy screen, wind barrier, edible hedge. Feijoa handles all three while quietly producing 50 to 200 pounds of fruit once mature. Spring flowers arrive with thick white petals and dramatic red stamens. And here's something most people never realize. The petals are edible. Sweet, slightly tropical, and excellent tossed into salads or eaten straight from the plant. Resilience is another defining trait. Feijoa tolerates poor soil, coastal wind, salt spray, and periods of drought once established. Pest pressure stays low. Maintenance stays minimal. While many varieties are technically self-fertile, planting a second shrub noticeably boosts production. The fruits ripen in fall and conveniently drop when ready, nature handling harvest timing for you. If your goal is maximum output from minimal oversight, Feijoa starts looking less like a plant and more like infrastructure. Now let's pivot away from fruit briefly, because true permanent food systems aren't built on sweetness alone. They need dependable vegetables too. And the next one has been quietly feeding people since medieval times. Good King Henry Long. Before spinach dominated gardens, there was Good King Henry, a perennial green cultivated across Europe for centuries, valued not for flash, but for reliability. Plant it once, and it keeps returning. Every spring, young shoots emerge that can be prepared much like asparagus. Tender, mild, and deeply satisfying after winter scarcity. As the season progresses, broad leaves follow, functioning beautifully as a spinach substitute packed with iron and minerals. It tolerates partial shade, accepts poor soils without complaint, laughs at cold temperatures, and once established, it asks almost nothing of you beyond occasional harvesting. Unlike annual greens that demand constant replanting, Good King Henry behaves more like a quiet partner, reappearing each year without negotiation. Its decline wasn't due to weakness. Spinach simply grew faster, fitting commercial agriculture better. But speed isn't always the same as resilience, and resilient crops are what permanent gardens depend on. Speaking of plants that refuse to disappear, the next one practically multiplies itself. Perennial leek, elephant garlic. At first glance, it looks like an oversized garlic. But elephant garlic is actually closer to a perennial leek. And once planted, it begins a slow but steady expansion underground. Each season, bulbs divide, clumps thicken. Your harvest grows without additional planting. Few vegetables demonstrate the plant once philosophy this clearly. You can harvest mature bulbs while leaving smaller offsets in place, ensuring next year's crop is already underway before the current one is even finished. Flavor is milder than traditional garlic, less sharp, more approachable, making it versatile across a wide range of dishes. Hardy, adaptable to many soil types, and far less demanding than annual alliums. Give it sunlight, reasonably drained soil, and minimal disturbance, and it quietly builds a long-term food reserve beneath your feet. But now, we arrive at the plant teased near the beginning, the one that doesn't just grow, it spreads, aggressively, relentlessly, almost unapologetically. And if your goal is serious calorie production, that's exactly what you want. Jerusalem artichoke, sunchoke. If most crops require encouragement, Jerusalem artichoke requires boundaries. Plant a small patch once, and years later it may still be producing, whether you remembered planting it or not. This perennial sunflower relative develops underground tubers that are crisp when raw and creamy when cooked, with a mild, nutty sweetness that adapts beautifully to roasting, soups, and purees. Nutritionally, they're rich in inulin, a prebiotic fiber that supports gut health. But productivity is where sunchokes become almost absurd. A modest planting can generate 50 to 100 pounds of tubers annually, and they accomplish this while tolerating poor soil, drought, flooding, and outright neglect. Tall summer stalks, often reaching 6 to 10 feet, create natural visual barriers, while bright yellow flowers attract pollinators. Yet the true magic happens below ground. Tubers multiply easily, leave even a small fragment behind, and the plant returns. For this reason, experienced growers recommend planting them where expansion won't become a problem: along fences, inside root barriers, in dedicated beds, because once established, removal becomes far more difficult than planting. Jerusalem artichoke doesn't represent convenience gardening. It represents permanence. The kind of crop that proves food production doesn't have to reset every spring. It can simply continue, year after year, decade after decade. Modern gardening often celebrates effort, but history celebrated foresight. Your great-grandparents didn't plant trees expecting immediate rewards. They planted knowing future generations would harvest the benefits. That mindset built resilient food systems. And it still can, because the smartest garden isn't the one you constantly rebuild. It's the one that keeps feeding you long after the work is done. Plant once, harvest for decades, maybe longer. And once you experience that shift, you stop thinking like a gardener. You start thinking like a food architect.